Now the radioactive isotopes, remember, strontium-90 is unique because it's just a waste product. But some of the other isotopes of strontium can be used in medicine. They can actually be used in bone cancer. It takes away some of the pain that's associated with bone cancer. There's some suggestion, it's still, I don't believe it's licensed or anything close to that at this point, but it suggests that it might at some point in the future have some use in treating osteoporosis. It can be used for removing layers of tissue on the eye or in the skin that you don't want to be there, so on and so forth. It can be used as a tracer for basically looking at bone deformities and that type of thing. So there are some uses of the radioactive isotopes. Strontium-90, I will remind you again, that's what we were asked to address, and it's just basically seen as a waste from the nuclear fallout. The general population is generally exposed to strontium, again, from our food and our drinking water and the air that we breathe. It's out there, it's in the atmosphere, it's persisted for all these years, it falls to the earth, it's in the soil, it can be in the surface water, so on and so forth. So we can be exposed to all of those different types and all those different isotopes of strontium. The adverse health effects that are associated with strontium are not actually caused by the strontium element itself, but more likely due to the radioactivity of those radioactive isotopes. That seems to be what does the damage. And I will tell you that strontium basically functions in the body much like calcium does. Very, very, very similar. And you know that the place where your body stores most of its calcium is in the bones and the teeth. So not surprisingly, if you happen to lock some strontium into your bones or your teeth, and it's locked there for a good many years, if it's radioactive, it can damage the surrounding tissue. So it's not surprising that the types of damage you get are going to be centered on the bone marrow, the soft tissues that are close to the bone. That's where you tend to get the damage. And again, it's more from the radioactivity than the fact that it's strontium. Uranium is another one where we have to discuss different isotopes. I was asked to discuss uranium oxide 238, which is a very confusing request because I don't know exactly what that means. Uranium oxide is actually a compound. It's not an element alone. It's a compound that you usually find. There's actually more than one version of uranium oxide. And so you can find it in fuel rods for nuclear power plants. You can also find it in the enrichment process of uranium. So I'm going to step away from that specific request dealing with uranium oxide 238 and deal a little bit more generally with just uranium. And I will tell you that it is naturally occurring, and all of the versions of uranium are radioactive in this case. So you don't have that dichotomy of non-radioactive and radioactive forms. They're all radioactive. Almost everything that's out there is uranium-238. It's that specific isotope. 99% of what's out there is the uranium-238. It's found in nearly all rocks and soils, and so it's released into the air. It's in the surface waters, so on and so forth. It's coming from erosion and volcanic eruptions. Same story as we've heard from these other elements. It's used in industry, but not quite to the extent of all those other ones, and because it's radioactive. The primary place where we hear about uranium is as fuel in nuclear reactors. It's also used in nuclear weaponry. To make the atomic bombs, you have to have uranium. It's used in other military weaponry, outside nuclear bombs and whatnot. It's used in missiles. It's used in special military ammunition. It's also used as shielding for tanks because it's a very, very dense material. It's a dense metal, and so you can use it for shielding against ammunition that would be coming your way. It's also used in aircraft. It's used in helicopter rotors and also as part of the control panel that you find in an airplane. So there are a few uses, but not quite so many. Exposure of the general population, same story you've heard. Since it's out there in nature, it's on the surface of the earth, most of us are getting the uranium that's in our body from food, water, and air. The adverse health effects are a little bit difficult to put your finger on. It seems to be linked to kidney damage, and then if you inhale it, not surprisingly, respiratory tract damage. There's not a whole lot of really good, strong studies that can point to definitive uranium poisoning incidents and look at the effects there. So this is a summary that's taking the next step here. I talked a little bit about all those elements. Now this is about all that I'm going to say about this specific topic. But we have barium, aluminum, strontium, and uranium. I told you that they're all out there in nature. I told you basically that we're taking them in as we eat and we breathe and drink water. So one of the questions that's naturally going to come up is there a way to test for these in the body? And if there is a test, does it give me a good indication of the level of exposure? How badly was I exposed and how recently? What's the time frame? And if you're looking at that test and those results, will it predict my health effects? Will it tell me whether I'm going to end up with that kidney damage or the leukemia or the bone cancer, so on and so forth? So this is a summary of that information. As far as barium is concerned, well, I already told you that all of this, you can expect to have certain levels in your body. So that's the first column for all of those. You can expect all 4 of those elements to be in your body. Is there a test that will look at barium? Is there one that will look at aluminum? Is there one that will measure strontium, uranium? The answer is yes. You can have tests done. They're not run-of-the-mill. You know, they're not just walking to your primary care physician necessarily and get tested for all those. But there are tests that can look at that in the body. Now here's the real nitty-gritty. If you have those tests done, will it determine the level of exposure? For barium, the answer is no. There's no good link between the tests that are done and it dictating how much barium you've been exposed to. It's not a good measure like that. There's not a good correlation. As far as aluminum is concerned, well, yeah, it can determine the level of exposure, but can only generally tell you that it's higher than normal. You know, there's not a good correlation between the two. It just tells you, yeah, it looks like it was higher than normal. Strontium, the same story as what we saw with barium. You can see if it's in the body, but what does it really mean? Don't know. You can't really make that next leap there. In uranium, can you test it in the body? Yes. Will it determine the level of exposure? Yes, but only to a certain degree. Again, it'll only give you that idea of, well, you're exposed to higher than normal levels, but it has to be within the past week or so because of the way that it's in your body and excreted from your body and so on and so forth. And then the last column there, will these tests predict your health effects? And unfortunately, even if you do get tested for those elements, and even if there are results that you can look at, there's not a great deal of good information that tells you whether you're going to have those adverse health effects. We haven't made those correlations yet. And that's just the surface there. Can I answer any questions for you?
That's a good report.